Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Reach Out podcast. This is your host, Juan Pablo Borges. Hope you all are having an amazing week so far. I know summer's over, we're back to school, we're back to regular schedule, but we'll still make the most out of it. And as always, make sure to follow us on Instagram, on TikTok. Make sure you listen to this awesome conversation on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and also on YouTube. And finally, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn with any comments or any questions that you have about the podcast. So, with that said, I want to introduce our guest for today. He's one of my role models. I definitely learned a lot from him, and I'm super stoked to have him on the podcast. So, without further ado, Minh Vo, welcome, and how's it going, man?
Hey Juan, how's it going? Nice to connect with you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for being here. Thank you for doing this. We were talking a little bit off camera about how as soon as I started the podcast, like a few months back, it was always like on the radar to have you on. So I think it's super dope to have you on right now.
Cool, awesome, man. Very nice to have. Nice to be here.
Yeah. Min, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you grew up, your school years, your job, just a quick spill.
Let's see. I was born and raised here in Houston. Went to school at the University of Houston. Graduated college in 2008. Career choice. Couple of things. An investment advisor, and also a gym owner as well. Yep.
Nice. Yeah. Today, Min, we're going to talk about having a growth mindset as a key for success. To be honest, it was very easy for me to come up with this topic because of all the stories that you used to tell me about your upbringing during college and within, the investment industry. For those of you who don't know, Min and I, we know like each other because I used to work at Verus Financial, which is Min's financial advice company, and I had some of the best times in that company, which I'm really grateful for him for letting me work there. And also just a huge shout out to Anthony, huge shout out to Katrina, to Brett, all the crew. And man, I want to start off by asking you, what were some of those moments in your life where you relied on having a growth and like a striving mindset in spite of the challenges that you were facing?
When people think about challenges, I think you always kind of use the word challenge incorrectly. It's always an opportunity, right? So at this point in my life, I look at every challenge as an opportunity. And depending on what challenges you're talking about, I was really young, like 17. My dad got into a car accident, broke two bones in his back, two in his neck. Was in a coma for a while. It's kind of handed a business to kind of at least look after along with my siblings. And that whole process was obviously tough and challenging, but you got to kind of focus on the big picture, right? Which is, okay, you could stay here and work, or you can kind of progress, go to college, move on with your career. And so I think that's probably the first challenge. And the second thing I would say is, no matter where you go, I became an investment advisor at like 21, 22. It's pretty young. Imagine going out there and trying to help your friends and family and connections with investment advice at 21 and 22, right? You just have to have that vision, right? What is it that you want your life to be like? What is it that your career needs to be like? And I told people, especially when I first started, I never wanted to be in a career where I was forced to be somewhere and watch my kid's birthday party through an iPad, right? And then that's no disrespect to any of the people that have those type of careers where they're kind of forced to be somewhere. That just wasn't my appeal, right? I didn't want to be told this is where you need to be, this is where you have to be, whatever the situation was. That just wasn't, that was the number one thing on my list that I said I didn't want. And so you had to kind of look at the careers and go, okay, what's out there that allows you the opportunity, the flexibility, and the financial advisor, investment advisor role appealed to me in that way, right? So that was kind of where I kind of started. I said, well, where do I want to be, right? And then just kind of work backwards from there, right? So
Yeah,
that's always kind of been my approach to things.
definitely. Yeah, and uh, working with you and those moments where you used to tell me about all these moments where as you say, like opportunities where like you were facing opportunities to grow and to just become a better version of yourself. It was very inspiring, and it made me like see the challenges that I was facing through a different perspective. And I just recall a lot of moments where I used to tell my friends, and like something about the podcast is that I always try to be grateful through channeling all the learnings that I get from the podcast through my friends and through my brothers and my family. So it was kind of like the same type of vibe when I was working for you, and all the things that you used to tell me, I used to like kind of repeat them to the people around me, just because it was a different way of seeing things and a different way of seeing the problems. And having that approach that you just mentioned, I think is something that is very, very worth considering, like owning in your own life. So definitely well said. And that brings me to my next point. So, Min, I just turned 21 last month. I worked for you for the greater part of last year and the year before that. And also Katrina was also already working for you once I joined the Verus company. But from what I know, she was still really young when she started working for you. I was always curious, why did you decide to give that vote of confidence to college students so they could work in your company?
I think it starts with that's where I was given the vote of confidence, right? I was in college when I took the job as an investment advisor or financial advisor. So that's probably the first thing. The second thing is it just depends on what you're looking to build, right? It depends on where your confidence is as a business owner, as a person in general, right? If you're a person that goes, I'm more interested in someone with a lot of skills already and that I don't really have to teach them, and I'm not as confident in my skill to teach people and grow people, then I would probably hire someone that already has a degree and already has career, right? On the vice versa, though, they carry some baggage with them, right? Which means they carry the way they do things, how they did things at their company, in their previous firm. This is how we did it. This is how we did that, right? And I never really liked that, team members would bring that baggage, you know. On the flip side, if you hire somebody fresh out of college, you got to be confident in your training, your ability to grow them, your ability to mentor them, understanding that they don't have those skills, they don't have some of those bits of knowledge that they've already been previously trained on. So it's kind of a give and take. So I think that's the first thing. And I'm always looking for fresh ideas, right? We're always looking for the next thing, the newest thing. Obviously, traditional stuff always works, but I already have the traditional stuff, right? So I don't need duplication of myself, right? I'm already a traditionalist, right? I'm a bit older. I've been doing this since 2005, 2006. So those traditional ideas I already have, right? Yeah, and someone in my age group probably wouldn't have new, fresh ideas because generally we were kind of grew up in the same time and same era, and different things like we have a podcast, right? I don't think that that's really something I would have personally done. And things like Instagram Reels and stuff that just a little different. That I don't think a bunch of 40-year-old people are going out there going, let's do that, right? Some are, but there aren't a ton of them.
Right. Yeah. No, I think, going back what you just mentioned about the being open to new ideas and having that just young crowd around you, something that I always saw whenever I was working at the office, you were always open, even though I could see some of those things you were just very, not hesitant, but very new to them. But it was always like with an open mindset that you used to do these things, and you still do them. So I think that's always very positive. I mean, I got to see firsthand the way you operate and the way you work in a day to day. And big part of your day to day is managing relationships, talking to people. What is the importance of managing relationships with the objective of growing yourself and growing yourself not only professionally but also personally?
So for me, I think managing relationships is simple. You just have to have one focus and what's better for them, right? If it's always in the best interest of your employees, the best interest of your team members, the best interest of your family, um, then you're always going to win, right? So whatever it is that you're doing, as long as you're focused on, okay, what is it in the best interest of my team, my employees, my business owner, my business stakeholders, my clients, if you focus on just that piece, and that's how you manage the entire relationship, right? Um, it's not possible for you to lose, right? Um, whether it's going, okay, think about just decision making, right? Should I buy this new piece of equipment or open a new office or whatever it is, right? Is it in the best interest of the team, the business, the stakeholders, the people in the office? And if it's in their best interest, I mean, obviously, best interest is a little bit of a judgment, but whatever you feel the best interest is, then you move forward with that
Right.
idea. If it's not even within their best interest and it's a venture of ego, right? So a lot of people do things based out of ego, right? I'm going to have the biggest office, the fanciest car, I'm going to do whatever it is, right, to make myself look good because I need to boost my ego, right? Um, but if you focus on your ego and you're not within the interest of the clients and the team, right? That becomes a problem, right? That really is where I kind of help people with managing relationships. Like anything you do, you go. The first question I always ask people is, um, if I said this, would I be concerned if it's on the front of the Wall Street Journal? The second thing I would figure out is if I did this, right, how would my mom feel about it? Right? Well, my mom said I did a good thing for someone, right? And if it isn't um, either one of those, then I just don't do it, right? And your customers, your clients, your team members can understand that you're doing it for them, right? It's like saying, okay, you can give somebody a raise, well, that's great, and you give somebody a raise to make them to 100 grand, and just to say that, oh, I've got 5 employees that are making 6 figures, and that's how you beat your chest and boast to people, but it's not good for your business financially, right? And you can't sustain that, and in the future, you'll end up with some disappointment for them, right, or for your business, right? So you have to be prudent a little bit as well. So looking out for their best interests and acting prudently, and then making sure that whatever it is that you say or do, if it's going to be plastered on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, then you probably don't want to do it.
100%. Yeah. Um, I think that's very true. And there was a lot of moments where I just kind of felt like I was drowning. We have this saying in Colombia, whereas you're drowning in a glass of water, you know? So you just make things a bigger deal that they should be. And I say this on the decision making end of things. Like we just be like hesitant towards doing things because of the consequence that that may bring or may not bring, and being part of your team and getting that perspective firsthand, it was very very helpful on getting those little filters of what to do or what not to do. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Moving on, I mean, I think that something really cool about this episode is that I got to get some intake from the listeners, from our regular listeners. And I want to start off this question by saying that obviously, you're the owner and founder of Verus Financial, which is a company focused on wealth management, estate planning, among other areas. And I say this because some of those listeners gave me some questions that they wanted me to ask you
Okay.
related to finance. So I want to ask you, what advice do you have for recent graduates that have student loans and are just starting to pay adult bills?
We had a little break there.
Yeah, good.
Sorry, ask the last question again.
Yeah. The first question was, what advice do you have for recent graduates that have student loans and are just starting off to pay their like big boy bills or adult bills?
Um, So what I would say to that is, first thing is you have to kind of take a look at, again, what's your vision? Where are you going, right? What's it look like? And understand that not all debt is bad debt, right? Um, and so that you have to just understand that that's the cost, right? Whether you were unable to finance your own education through other means, but had to actually get a loan, the first thing you have to look at is going, okay, well, what's that debt look like? Are there any programs out there, government or otherwise, that can help me reduce some of those costs and some of those expenses, right? So first thing is just kind of doing some due diligence. That's what I tell people. Think about anything that you're doing in life. Do some due diligence. Just kind of look and make sure that there's a different way to pay off stuff. If there's anything I can do, whether it's work for the government and they'll pay it off a portion of it or whatever it is, right? So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is come up with a strategy, right? So whether I'm going to pay it off in 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, whatever it is, right? And then once you come up with a strategy, does that strategy align with your goals, right? Meaning, you say you graduate college right now and you go, I'm going to take a gap year and become a doctor, just as an answer, right? Well, there's no point in paying off as much of it as possible right now, right? Focus
Right.
on getting your studies, getting your MCAT, all that other stuff, and just make the minimum payment and then figure it out later, right? But if your goal is to retire at 40, right, or something facetious like that, then you probably need to pay it off a little bit quicker, right? So it's all dependent on your goal. So I think the first step is doing the due diligence. Number two, coming up with a payoff strategy. And then the last but not least is making sure it aligns with your goals.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah. Students, uh, they don't really start doing the research and they don't start doing that due diligence just because of the feeling of they're feeling scared. I have student loans, I have debt, so I just starting out with the wrong foot. And as you say, that may not always be the reality. And second question that they wanted me to ask you is, how do I start saving? That was like a very common one.
Okay. So I'll go back to that being scared thing. You got to keep score. Whether you're ahead of the game or you're behind the game, you got to keep score. And whether it's scary to look at the bill or not, you just got to look at the bill, right? It's there. You got to do it. So ignoring it isn't going to make the problem go away, right? So that's the first thing. In terms of how do you start saving? I think it's like everything else. Just kind of the hardest dollar to save is the first dollar, right? I always tell people we do jujitsu. I do jujitsu, and I tell people always ask, well, I'm not a black belt or anything, but I've heard, and I always tell people, they're like, oh, is getting your promotion, the next promotion, really hard? Because I've gotten a blue belt promotion. I was like, no, that's not the hardest belt. The hardest belt is the white belt, right?
Yeah.
It's the first dollar. The first dollar you save is the hardest, because you have to reset a couple of things. Number one, your priorities, right? Because saving is a priority, right? You have to reset your priorities. You have to reset your spending habits, right? So I think that's the first place to start, is to start with the first dollar. And where do you start? You know, I think a very straightforward and traditional route is to put money into a money market. And today's interest rates are pretty good. You're probably earning somewhere between 4 to 5.5% on every dollar you set aside, right? And most money markets have a minimum of literally a dollar. So you just gotta put a dollar in and get started with that.
Definitely. You heard it here first from men. I mean, I would trust men if I were you. That's what I'm going to say. And men, going back to the having young crowd around you and considering the demographic of this podcast is mostly college students, young graduates, I want to know, what advice would you give to the upcoming class of professionals that are just graduating college?
Enjoy it, right? I used to tell people when I first became an investment advisor. The first 2 or 3 years were the absolute worst. I mean, the most not fun parts of it. At the same time, they were actually probably the best years, right? There were no expectations, there were no goals. You were just trying to make it, right? And I don't know if the folks I started with felt the same way, but those were fun times for us, right? We had a good time. We were growing, we were learning, we were working together, and those are fun times. As you get older, there's expectations, right? Whether it's from yourself, from your family, from just the industry, right? In any career, right? In any career that you start with, the first couple of years, you're just learning and having fun and, having a good time, right? It's like going to school, right? Kindergarten's fantastic. First grade, second grade, third grade, right? You get to like fifth and sixth grade, they start talking about like the STAR test or the TOS test or whatever it is nowadays, the SAT, the ACT when you turn 15 or 16, you're like, oh my gosh, all these expectations, right? That I have to meet, right? If you don't score the X number or Y number on your SAT, you're not going to be any good or whatever it is, right? So just think about that, right? The first couple of years are the best, right? So you come out of college, you got your first career, learn a lot, have a lot of fun, enjoy it, and then kind of go from there.
I like that answer a lot, to be honest. You kind of went like with a different route of what the other guests go with, which is kind of like a good breath of air, because I know that a lot of the seniors at Bauer, they're feeling the pressure. They're feeling like the real pressure of what I'm gonna do once I graduate, where I'm gonna work, how much money I'm gonna make, and it's kind of not the best scenario for me to see them just worry about all those things right from the get-go. They kind of forget about what you say about enjoying and taking in every step of the process. So definitely take Min's advice. I
Yeah.
definitely take it. So, you know,
I would say, what are we now? 2008. So what's that? 15 years out of college? No, 15. Yeah. 15 years out of college, and you talk to people who graduated college with us, and maybe when we first graduated college, they had really good jobs and they made a bunch of money, but then they kind of plateaued. Maybe they had really fancy degrees and maybe not as good as you were and didn't graduate. You didn't graduate with as good a grade, so you didn't get the job offer at XYZ company, right? But the world's an interesting place. In my opinion, I don't think you can outrun everything, but you can probably outwork 50 to 80% of the factors that are out there, right? Maybe you didn't start off with the best college GPA, so you didn't get the best job, right? And you're making a lot less than your friends. Well, don't feel bad about that. You still got time. Just outwork them on the back end of it, right?
yeah.
I joke with people all the time. I graduated college and I was still an investment advisor or a financial advisor. I don't know if you guys know about financial advisors, but they start you off with like 100% commission. They're like, you got a job. It's 100% commission, right? And my mom was like, oh, it's time for you to get a real job now that you graduated college. That's what do you mean a real job? She goes, yeah, get like a real job, one that like pays you regularly. And I was like, I think I'm good. She's like, I didn't come to America for you to work on 100% commission. And I think you have to pay them when you have a bad month, don't you? And I was like, yeah, you're right. um, and, you know, and at some point in your life, you got to figure out what is your definition of wealth, right? And happiness. And so it's not always about money. Now, money gives you options. I tell people that's all it does, right? Not that I dislike money. Obviously, I'm in the finance business, so I can't dislike money.
Right.
But there's obviously a tipping point in life too.
Yeah. No, that's a great way of seeing it. What is your perception of wealth? And I feel like that becomes more clear what you want, like with the years passing. And going into the last part of this interview, there's my two favorite questions that I try to ask everyone. First one is the time machine question. Man, if you had a time machine and you were to go back to, I don't know what year this was, but you had in front of you 20-year-old Min, what would you say to him?
1 year old?
20-year-old.
20-year-old. I was like, 1 year old. 20-year-old? You know, I gotta tell you, I wouldn't say anything different than I already did. Because it's been pretty good. Can't lie. Um, so, and maybe that's just my perception of my own life, but I think it's pretty good. So I always tell people, if you had to go back though, um, don't lose sight of who you are. If I had to pick one thing, there you go.
Well, it makes me really happy that you wouldn't change how life turned out. I feel like that very, like in an implicit manner, is just the idea of success, the idea of what this whole episode is about, like growing every year, every day, so that when the time comes and I ask you the time machine question, your answer is that you wouldn't change a thing. So that makes me really happy, man. And last question is, what makes you happy, man?
Um, I'm old now, so I would say most old people just peace. Um, Peace with myself, peace with my family, peace with where I'm at. Um, the peace of not having to fit in. I think a lot of people, whether they're in their 20s or 30s or 40s, and sometimes in their 50s and 60s, are always trying to figure out how to fit in, right? I was telling my son this. We were chit chatting about something, and we're talking about just sports and stuff, and he was like, "Well, I don't really like any of the traditional sports, right? Like basketball or football or anything like that. Soccer. He tried tennis, right? And he says, maybe I want to try gymnastics this year, or last year he did dance and football, and he liked both. And he said, well, he goes, how come is that I don't like any of the traditional sports that all the other people like, right? I said, well, I don't know. I said, why does it matter? He goes, I don't know. I mean, there's not a lot of boys in gymnastics or anything like that. I said, doesn't really matter. I said, let me ask you a question. I said, do you think I'm into cars? He's like, no, not really. If you see my car, it's pretty dirty. uh, he goes, do you think I watch a lot of football and sports? He's like, no, not really. He's like, do you think I play golf? And he was like, I've never seen you play golf. And I was like, no. And I said, okay. So, and just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean you need to be doing it. And don't be afraid to be out there and just doing your own thing, right? Um, you don't need to worry so much about fitting in. And look, in your 20s, you're going to be forced into that. And I was forced into that in my career, right? I was forced into the fitting in, like, fancy suits and shirts and ties and, who's got the nicest car and yada, yada, yada. And that was a culture that we were bred in our firm. And nothing wrong with it. It's helped me obviously learn some things about like nice stuff that I kind of enjoy sometimes, but it's not really who I am, right? And what was it, 4 years ago when we opened Verus Financial, I had the chance to get rid of the suits and shirts and ties and get rid of all that. And so I wear mostly t-shirts to work every day. But that's just me, right? That's what brings me joy. So I always tell people that, when you're going through that process, don't be so worried about fitting in. Just do you, and let the chips fall where they may.
I think that's the best way to conclude this episode. You know, I always love the last question, what makes you happy? Because I get to see a little bit more about the essence of each guest. And also, the Reach Out podcast is also very focused towards being grateful. And, when we scheduled this episode, the only thing that was in my head was like, man, I'm just so grateful that I got to live like that experience when working with the team, with you, Anthony, Katrina. And like continue having those relationships is something that I'm also really grateful for. And there's also like a huge shout out to everybody for them to take a little bit more of perspective of what Min just said within their own life and their own situation, and be more grateful for whatever you have going on right now. And yeah, you know, again, man, thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this episode. Do you have any last messages for the listeners?
Um, you know, find the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Nice. I love that one. Yeah. As always, don't be afraid to reach out. It's not about the things that you can get from people, but it's about building real, true relationships with them. So, yeah, guys, thank you for listening. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good one.
All right, cool. Thanks.